This is Bishop Michael Burbidge, and you are listening to the Walk Humbly Podcast.
Welcome to the Walk Humbly Podcast. I'm Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer for the Diocese and your co-host. If you haven't already, please make sure you rate this podcast and write a review on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Overcast. You can sign up for our e-newsletter at arlingtondiocese.org. You can also follow Bishop Burbidge on Twitter. More than 15,000 of you already do, at Bishop Burbidge. You can also send your questions for Bishop Burbidge to our email at info@arlingtondiocese.org. Again, that's info@arlingtondiocese.org. I welcome your host, Bishop Burbidge. Bishop, welcome.
Very good, Billy. Great. This is our first podcast of the new year, so I wish all of our listeners a blessed new year filled with our Lord's peace. Happy New Year, everyone.
And we're here in the new studio, recording in a quality space here. This is great.
Our first podcast in our new studio, and our new studio is certainly a result and only possible because of the generosity of our parishioners. So much of our work that we're able to do is through the help of our parishioners. Our Bishop's Lenten Appeal and our communications office is a recipient of that appeal. And here we are in this beautiful studio. So it's a tool that we should use to promote the good news and the truth and joy of the gospel.
Now, before we dig into the meaty topics, I have to ask, you're a real big Eagles fan, even here in Redskins territory.
Takes a lot of courage, Billy. Takes a lot of courage.
And the Eagles just pulled off a 1-point wild card round win over the Bears. It was pretty amazing, and I have to imagine you were fairly excited.
Well, I always say I thought sports was help us to relax. I was not that. I was able to catch the end of the game, of course, and it was not relaxing. A 1-point game with a kind of an ending that no one could have predicted, and so I have to admit I was a little happy.
Now, this coming Sunday, we've got some huge games coming up with the divisional playoffs. Do you have any predictions?
Yeah, I do. I always could predict some games with my heart and with my head. So for those who are interested, my heart would say Eagles, Rams, Chiefs, and Chargers.
All right.
My head would say Saints. That means they would beat the Eagles, and
that's
I guess one way to look
hard
at
to say?
it. Yeah, well, it's hard for bishops to root against Saints.
That's true.
That's one way to look at it. So Saints, Rams, Chiefs, and Patriots.
Okay.
There you go.
So you got a couple overlapping.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I'm glad we got to the serious topic first.
Yeah, we have to start with that, of course. But now actually getting into a serious topic. So Pope Francis asked the bishops of the United States to take a retreat for discernment and spiritual renewal as what he called a necessary step toward responding to the spirit of the gospel and the crisis of credibility we are currently experiencing. So how was that retreat? You attended it, and what was the benefit that you think it had on the body of bishops here in the U.S.?
Well, yes, I just returned from the retreat, and I would say I am spiritually renewed and refreshed.
Oh, good.
So that's the goal of every retreat, and I know departing and having the opportunity to speak to brother bishops, that was the overall sense, that we really felt that this was an invitation by the Holy Father, but one that was grace-filled. It was a beautiful retreat at Mundelein Seminary in Chicago, beautiful setting, quiet and reflective, and much of the retreat was in silence, which is very, very important. The gospel for today, providentially, is the disciples on the stormy waters. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden the Lord appears on the stormy waters and says, "It is I, take courage, do not be afraid." And I really think that's what Pope Francis was inviting the bishops to experience. We all know that we are on very stormy waters at this time in the life of our church. But we need to hear the voice of the Lord saying those same words. Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. We are not going to resolve and solve all the issues of the church through our own efforts and protocols and procedures, all of which are important. We can only do so with the strength and wisdom and the grace that the Lord will give us. And that's what this retreat was all about. And I really believe that it will produce abundant fruit as we all return home to our diocese. The retreat master was invited by Pope Francis himself. He asked Father Cantalamessa who is what we call in our church the preacher of the papal household. So his job, I think, for the last 37 years is to preach retreats and days of recollections to the popes, to the cardinals, to the curia. He's done that for 37 years. That's 3 popes.
Have you ever attended a retreat with him?
I did.
Wow.
Right after I was ordained a bishop in 2006, I think it was, when I went on the retreat, a couple of years after I was ordained. It was actually sponsored by a foundation that provided a retreat for 30 bishops with Father Cantalamessa. And it was the first week of Lent, and it was in the desert.
Wow.
In Arizona. And it was probably one of the best retreats I ever attended. So I was thrilled when I heard that he was the preacher. And his reflections were not on the specific issues dealing with the church. His reflection were trying to help us as bishops to hear God's call in our own lives and the sacred duty that is ours, and one with which we have to renew. I think of 2 phrases, if I could just share with our listeners, that touched my heart as I was on the retreat. The one was the homily on the Epiphany, on Sunday, and the life, the gospel that day ends with the words talking about the Magi, and the gospel ended with the words, and having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed for their country by another way. And Father Cantalamessa's invitation to us as bishops was, bishops, I want you to depart from this retreat by another way.
Wow.
And by that, Billy, what I thought, at least in my prayer, he was saying, do not go home with the same attitude and the same disposition and the same routine. Go home by another way, with a renewed sense of integrity and faithfulness and holiness, and be this new person that the birth of Christ, the gift that He has given to us, and live in that light and not in the darkness. Go home by another way. What really great advice, huh?
Absolutely.
And then the other phrase that he said was, he said, the bishops all kind of chuckled at this point. He said, when you were ordained a bishop, part of the ordination ceremony was that you had to say, basically, here am I, Lord. Here am I. And he said, when you were ordained as a bishop, and it would be true for priests too, but when you were ordained as a bishop, you didn't know what that here I am meant. And you didn't know what life as a bishop in 2019 would mean.
Yeah.
But you do now. And we all said,
Wow.
You're right. We did not know that this would be the circumstances we would find ourselves. He says, but now I want you to renew that here I am. Renew it. This is where God has placed you. This is the task before you. And with His grace and courage, renew that here I am, and say it every day. But that's not great advice only for bishops, is it? It's for married couples. It's for anyone, any vocation that people have chosen. You don't know exactly where that's going to lead you. But the yes that has to be renewed must be daily. And I was really grateful that he challenged us in such a powerful way. So, Billy, to answer your question, it was a beautiful retreat. I think it touched the hearts of the bishops. So grateful to our Holy Father for bringing us together in such a special way.
That's wonderful. Thank you for those insights. Those are very practical insights from that retreat. I appreciate you sharing that. This coming Sunday, January 13th, we're celebrating the Diocesan Mass honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the national fight for civil rights. This year, the Mass is being hosted at the Cathedral of St. Thomas More, and a reception will follow. This location is different than locations from years prior. Why did you choose to move it to the Cathedral this year?
Yeah, my first couple of years here, we had our this Mass at St. Joseph's Parish in Alexandria. Very diverse community. Many Black Catholics are part of that congregation. And the celebration both years were so joyful and powerful, and a tremendous choir. They know how much I love that choir at St. Joseph's. Just beautiful, and a great reception afterwards. It was really, really good. But, and some of the parishioners suggested this too. but our churches doesn't hold the same amount of people as the cathedral would.
Right.
Why don't we expand this? This is not just a parish celebration. This should be open to Catholics throughout our diocese. But I'm very pleased the St. Joseph Choir will be there to enhance our prayer through their gift of music. And it's very appropriate that, I always think it's very appropriate that as our nation honors Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., it's also within the Church Respect Life Month, which highlights and celebrates the dignity of every human person. And Martin Luther King Jr., as we know, fought that all persons without exceptions, especially those who have been subject to such bigotry and prejudice throughout their history and throughout their lives, must be afforded that same dignity and the same rights with justice. And so I think that parallel is so important. And I think that as we gather for this Mass on Sunday, and I hope as many people as possible can come, what we are praying for in a special way with God's grace is the eradication of any form of bigotry and prejudice that exists, sadly, still today.
Yeah.
We all have examples of that in our society.
Now, you've spoken about this issue in the past about civil rights, but prejudice, and then the USCCB released a long statement. It was actually in November. The only thing that was done at the November meeting, other than the discussion and conversation around the sexual abuse crisis, was the issuing of this document on racism, right, and the church's response to it. You've spoken about it on this podcast before. Why is it so important to you to keep addressing this issue?
Right, and the pastoral letter against racism issued by the bishops and approved, as you said, the November meeting, is not just a document that is supposed to sit on a shelf.
Right.
It's a document that is to inspire and to challenge us. I formed a committee here within our own diocese, not really a committee, a working group,
right,
of how will these key points and these key issues made in this pastoral letter, how will they be addressed and implemented within our diocese? We have a team really working hard to make sure this document is alive, it's vibrant.
Right.
But it's important, Billy. The first thing is to acknowledge that this is a reality, prejudice and racism, bigotry, not only in history, but even in society today. Sad to say, but it is, and we have to acknowledge that. We have to address what are the root causes of that, and what are the ways that as a society and people of goodwill of all faiths can join together to make sure that all persons are treated with equality and dignity and given the same rights and opportunities.
So anyone that would like to attend this Mass, the Mass in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is on January 13th at 11 a.m. at the Cathedral of St. Thomas More. Again, 11 a.m. on January 13th. All are welcome, and then there's going to be a great reception afterward. And as Bishop said, there's going to be a fantastic choir there that you really want to hear. Bishop, last night the President held his first Oval Office address to the nation, speaking about illegal immigration and the current government shutdown, which has hundreds of thousands of federal employees without pay until the shutdown is over. In his address, he spoke about the cost of the broken immigration system, both financial and human, and the lack of border security, including issues related to human trafficking, drug smuggling, people who are victims of sexual assault during their trek across the border, terrorism, criminal activity, all these kinds of things. And at the heart of the government shutdown is a political disagreement over funding and construction of a border wall or fence. But it seems like there was a lot of common ground, interestingly enough, between his address and the address of two Democratic leaders. When you watched the address, what were your thoughts? Well,
that's a very good point that you made. And actually, I thought the same thing. It was amazing to hear, as you listen to the president and then the Democratic response, the points that they repeated that were in common. That yes, for the president of the United States and elected officials, they have a sacred duty and obligation to protect our nation and our citizens. Mm-hmm. So that was repeated. Both the president and the Democratic response spoke about our proud history. The ability to welcome immigrants, to celebrate diversity and the gifts that people from other lands bring into our nation, which has always been a part of who we are, but to acknowledge the reality that the current system is broken and the path that allows for illegal immigration also brings some serious consequences that need to be addressed. So there were points of agreement. That's what the bishops have always said. And bishops have always talked about comprehensive immigration reform is essential, which includes the protection and security of our nation, and also to respect the dignity of human persons and to find a way to celebrate such diversity and the path that allows immigrants to come legally into our country. But it's broken.
Yeah.
And it's been broken for a long time, and it needs to be fixed. Bishops never get involved in the legal process of how you legislate that and how to go about. That's why we elect our officials to do so.
Right.
It is. I'm sure many listeners and citizens share, my concern that it's very regrettable. It's frustrating that our elected officials cannot come together to do what is right and just here. We're seeing more of a political, a party affiliation rather than let's put that all aside. Let's get this done. This is so regrettable. Government shutdown. This should be a last resort.
Yeah.
And so we have to pray for our elected officials. Put aside all these political motives, and maybe even you can tell at times that there's not a mutual respect for one another, which is sad.
Yeah, that came through.
We can disagree. There's
Right.
nothing wrong with disagreeing. There's nothing wrong with saying there's multiple ways of fixing this. Let's put them all on the table. Can you imagine any organization that would not allow different viewpoints and opinions and suggestions to come forth together and then not reach a conclusion?
Yeah.
We have to allow for debate, passionate debate, disagreement. But we all agree with what must be done. And so we have to pray for our elected officials and challenge them. Please call them.
Yeah.
Please write to them and tell them to get this job done.
Yeah.
It's long overdue, the comprehensive immigration reform that our nation needs.
And it seems like in the meantime, there was a huge cost. It's not just the government shutdown, but every day that the system is broken, there are people who are fleeing violence and persecution who need our help that aren't getting it, or they're in a process that is dreadfully slow, and there are law enforcement officers exposed to enormous risks. Some have been killed. Drug trafficking continues, human trafficking, and the enormous toll that takes on the nation. Both sides are right about the cost of this thing, and in the meantime, both issues are continuing to be exploited. It's horrible.
Right, and we have seen so sadly too. Part of this comprehensive immigration reform too is when families come to our border. We have to be able to find a way to do everything possible to ensure that families stay together. That's at the heart of this issue also.
Without a doubt, absolutely. So Bishop, we have a couple questions from parishioners. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
I'm ready.
So Lynn, she didn't mention her parish, but Lynn asks, she said, I'm very hard of hearing and wonder if confession might be done over email. This occurred to me after seeing that telephone confessions are under consideration. All right, so a little backstory for people. In our last podcast, I think his name was George, had asked if to curb the long lines of confession, if we could do confessions over the phone. So Lynn is asking if they could be done over email, but Lynn, Bishop, you clarify what was not said last time.
I have to say, Lynn, that telephone or drive-by confessions are not under consideration because, as we discussed a little bit in our last podcast, the sacraments. How blessed are we as Catholic Church to have the sacraments of the Church in which the ministry of Jesus himself continues to be exercised. The Lord wants to continue to communicate his presence to us, his words to us, and he uses another human being, the priest, who stands in the person of Christ to be the expression of those words. So in the words of absolution, for example, you don't say God forgives you of your sins. The priest says, I absolve you from your sins in the name of God, because the priest is in that very person of Christ, and that encounter allows the person. We all know the wonderful, powerful fruits and joy of leaving the confessional because we encountered the Lord. We heard him speaking to us those words of forgiveness. So it always will involve that human interaction, that encounter with God at the center of it, of course. But that's a serious. Lynn makes a serious point, and I know there are others probably throughout our diocese who have difficulty with hearing, or maybe even a serious disability, and the privacy that must be part, and the confidentiality of confession has to be guaranteed also.
Right.
So if that is a challenge for Lynn or for any of our listeners, I am very confident that our parish priests would be very happy to meet in a setting where they can go to confession, to encounter the Lord in this beautiful sacrament, but also to have that confidentiality and that would be necessary.
Absolutely. Very good.
Thank you,
All
Lynn.
right, so Richard from Good Shepherd in Alexandria asks, is cremation approved by the church, and how would that affect our own resurrection?
Well, the short answer is yes. Cremation is approved by the church, but the church will always we always teach, that we talk about the resurrection of the body and the fact that we are body and spirit. So the church will always encourage highly and recommend the burial of the body. It's the very symbolism of that, that we do die to Christ in our mortal flesh, but we will rise again in glory. It's very beautiful. But for pastoral reasons, cremation remains an option.
Right.
But the church will always ask that it will be carried out with the same reverence and sacredness that we would if we were burying a body, a casket into the ground.
Yeah.
And so we do have norms and guidelines for that. Parishes certainly can easily make them known. But the sacredness of the burial of the ashes, not to be thrown on a beach.
Right, that's a common question.
Right, yeah, to the whole sense of sacred ground, and a reverence that must be a part of that the cremation and the burial of the remains.
So Lynn and Richard, I hope that answered your questions. Bishop, before we close out here, we've got a big week coming up here. We're not going to have another podcast before that. We have Life is Very Good, and then the Mass for Life, and obviously the March for Life, all there within a couple days of each other. Please talk a little about what you anticipate for that, and then send us off with your blessing, if you would.
Here in the Diocese of Arlington, what a wonderful tradition we have. The night before Thursday night, next week from tomorrow, next Thursday, we have our Life is Very Good rally. Because so many, it's amazing that so many young people really make pilgrimages, journeys, colleges, universities, parishes from all around the country to participate the next day in the March for Life. So we, throughout our diocese, parishes open up their doors and their gymnasiums to house the young people, to provide a place of rest. And so we started this wonderful tradition the night before. Why not gather them in this rally, really,
right?
In a sense, for young people, so they can see they're not alone, that they are, with young people from all around the country. And we put together this beautiful program. I think it's over 5,000 young people. And they have like the music that the kids enjoy, and they engage, and with Christian groups, and really it's a rally.
Yeah,
it's an enthusiastic rally of singing. I get to address them briefly, but the most powerful part is after all that enthusiastic singing and even dancing and clapping, we end the night with a Eucharistic procession. And Billy, I've never seen anything like it.
I was there. It's amazing.
I think I said last year, only the Lord, in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, could calm 5,000 kids down and bring them from being so enthusiastic to profoundly silent.
I said last year that if I closed my eyes in prayer when you were coming around with the monstrance, and I would have thought I was the only person in the room.
I know.
There wasn't a sound in the arena.
Right.
The arena actually holds 8,500. I think we have 8,100 tickets already sold.
Oh, is that right?
We're going to cap it out.
Way more than.
I think last year was the Mass for Life at 5,000 in attendance.
Okay.
But yeah, the night before the Life is Very Good rally, it's over 8,000, and then the next day it's usually just a little bit less. Right,
that's where we would have. Yeah. So
but it's amazing.
And only the Lord does that, and it's so prayerful. It is just what a way. And throughout the rally, there are I can't tell you the number of priests from around the country, not just many from our diocese, available for confessions for the young people. Yeah. So here what we have is we help to prepare them, 8,000 plus kids, right, for the next day. Mm-hmm. They get to go to confession, right, because they want to go in spiritually ready and prepared for the March for Life. They get to be in the presence of our Eucharistic Lord. The next morning, earlier in the morning, I think it's like 10, we have Mass. And some have already made their way into the March for Life, but others have not. So they begin with Mass that I'm so honored to celebrate and preach at. Perfect way to begin the March for Life.
True.
We begin it with the Lord and with the strength that God provides. And I always remind them that strengthened now with the gift of the Holy Eucharist, we can march for life with confidence, with courage and serenity and joy, because we have the truth of the gospel. And I think that's what really, really bewilders people who do not share our conviction about the sacredness of all human life from the moment of conception to natural death, is they're peaceful. They're joyful.
Right.
They're young.
Very young.
Very young.
March for Life, that's what always surprised me about the March, is how young it is.
Right. Why? Because they understand the truth of the gospel. From the moment of conception, we are God's. We belong to God's.
Yeah. I also noticed last year, because usually when you have a major event, there's a Mass and there's kind of a quiet kind of respect and things when you walk up to give a talk, whatever. At this, when you walked up on stage, there's 8,500 kids that had just heard a rock band. They were all screaming and yelling. It had to be a different environment for you to walk into than normal.
Yeah, it gets you motivated too.
I'm sure it does. So stay tuned. Our social media, we are going to be hitting it real hard with lots of photos and videos. So follow us on Twitter, Arlington Church. Go to our Facebook page, Instagram. We're going to be putting, if we have an account, we're going to be putting up a lot of photos and video of that, so you can keep track of everything we're doing on social media, as well as with Bishop Burbidge and his work that week. Bishop, if you would, any final thoughts, but also if you send us off
thank you
your
again.
blessing.
Once again, everyone, I wish all of you a happy new year filled with God's abundant blessings and peace, his peace within your hearts and within your homes. I ask the Lord to protect you and to watch over you always, to give us all the strength that we need this new year to renew our commitment to walk humbly with our God. Thank you for listening to the Walk Humbly Podcast. Make sure you check out more episodes on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. You can follow me on Twitter at Bishop Burbidge, where I offer spiritual reflections each morning on the gospel and share photos and updates of what is going on in the Diocese of Arlington. Stay up to date with news, event information, inspirational content, and more by subscribing to our e-newsletter at arlingtondiocese.org.